All right, everyone, welcome to our global speaker series. We're really excited to have all of you here this evening. The global speaker series historically has been something that we do in classrooms, in person, around the country. As we share our global expertise with students around the country, and also let them know about the work that we do at Dragons. Over this year, though, we wanted to bring these into classrooms and to living rooms virtually, and so we've expanded our global speaker series to the public as well. So we're really excited to be able to expand this to all of you tonight, and to really highlight our incredible instructors and the expertise that they have. And so I really couldn't be more excited tonight to introduce Colleen Doherty, who is here with us. She has been a Dragons instructor since 2018, leading programs in Latin America and in the US most recently. She's originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm from Ohio too, so we share that in common. But she went to Ohio University to study conservation biology and wildlife, and then got her master's of social work at Washington University in St. Louis. She's currently working in experiential education at the Island School. And so she's had a lot of her experience in social work and the nonprofit world, and travel has all come together to lead her into the experiential education world, and more specifically, this connection between empathy and travel. So we're really fortunate to have her tonight. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Colleen. And Colleen, please share more about yourself as well. There's lots of accolades that I could share, but we're just so excited to have you tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Wow, I feel like your intro was more succinct and maybe better said than I would have said myself. So I really appreciate that. And thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I really am just flattered and feel so privileged that you all have taken your time out of your evening to hear my presentation. And so that means a lot to me. And as Alex said, this is part of our global speaker series. And Dragons is trying to do a number of these throughout 2022. The goal is to do 100 as part of this work to break down global barriers, using global education to break down barriers, which is something I'm personally passionate about. This talk relies heavily on my own personal experience, my own personal opinions, as well as my interpretation of research that I have found related to my work in travel, primarily with students. And so very briefly, I know that most people here are probably familiar with Where There Be Dragons. I will comment just briefly about sort of what the program is in general. There's a heavy emphasis on not only learning about the world through other cultures, but also learning about the self through that work, going out in order to go in. And our programs primarily consist of summer programs for youth or young people ages 15 to 20, and gap year programs, which last 3 months for young people ages 17 to 22, though we do also have adult educator and school-based programs. And as Alex shared, I'm Colleen, originally from Cleveland. I've been living primarily internationally since 2013. My passion, so I've been teaching high school in the US and abroad, but I've really found my true passion that has sort of connected my varied interests through facilitating and learning alongside students in experiential learning programs in a number of countries in the United States, as well as, or in a number of countries in Latin America, as well as the United States and currently the Bahamas. And a fun fact, I once scuba dived with a school of hammerhead sharks, which has nothing to do with my presentation tonight. What my presentation concerns is the idea of travel and empathy. And it's something that I think is particularly relevant and an interesting question to ask. Why travel, and how does travel relate to empathy or increase empathy, especially currently, obviously with the state of a global pandemic. And so I am going to start this presentation with just some brief facts about travel, some brief statistics that are benefits to travel. One is greater cognitive flexibility, enhanced creativity, and a more defined sense of self. These relate to sort of the cognitive processes that are encouraged when we are exposed to the unfamiliar, when we venture out and experience different new ways of doing life. Others, less chronic stress and depression, greater happiness and life satisfaction, reduced risk of health and heart disease. There may be some questions around correlation versus causation, but it shows that taking that time to travel actually does have positive physical health benefits in relation to relieving stress, and a greater generalized trust and faith in humanity. Now, obviously, empathy is not shown up here. That is the one I want to focus on today as a potential benefit of travel. So I want to start with a quote. It, in some ways, is a bit of an ironic quote. I don't know if people have heard this before. Mark Twain stated, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." The reason I say it's ironic is because that Mark Twain himself definitely had his own prejudices and biases emblematic of his time and of his time period. And yet I have heard this quote stated many times, and it sort of motivated me to do a bit of research into examining whether there's any truth to this, and whether he was onto something or not, and if so, why, and what kind of travel. And that brings me to the concept of empathy. If anyone, I would love for anyone to type a rough definition into the chat box. This is also a spot where if people have questions, we can use those at the end of the presentation as well. I'd love to reserve some time for questions. But if anyone would like to type into the chat box a definition, just in general words, of empathy. See, sensitivity to others' feelings from Marion. Absolutely. You try to feel what someone else is feeling from Anne. Absolutely. Shared mutual reciprocal space. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Yeah, absolutely. I think that those definitions fit closely with, oh, here's another one. One more, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Absolutely. So you all pretty much defined the Oxford definition, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So this is the Oxford definition. Interestingly, the word empathy has not actually existed in the English language for very long. It was originally translated, as far as we know, from German in 1909 to describe the cognitive effort and bodily feeling of experiencing another person. So it has not been in the English language that long, and yet in the last couple of decades, the interest in this concept of empathy and the word empathy has increased dramatically. So this graph that's shown on the screen right now shows the increase in Google searches of the word empathy just from 2004 to 2016. And this reflects the growing body of research interest in empathy as well, the growing understanding of empathy through scientific research. And this research, it goes into neurons, neural pathways, hormones, and specific parts of the brain that are actually involved in empathy, which scientists have now reached a place where they're able to map or demonstrate and watch those areas of the brain that are involved in empathy on a screen. So they're able to actually map empathy in MRIs in brain research. And as far as our definition of empathy, most models in the research going beyond Oxford include three important parts. So one is the ability to actually just read and cue into others' emotions and facial expressions. and that involves our mirror neurons, if anyone's heard that term. Another is perspective taking. So this is the cognitive form of empathy, where we actually take time to think about what it might be like to be in someone else's shoes, of course, that expression. And then related to some of the definitions that folks shared in the chat, the ability to actually experience the emotions of another person. Now, this doesn't mean that we experience the other person's experience. It doesn't mean that we know what it's like to be in their shoes, truly, but we can identify a related emotion in ourselves. We can identify an emotion that may be related to what they are feeling. One really important part of empathy that I have noticed and read about is that empathy is actually not a finite quality. It is something that can be increased in the same way that a muscle in the gym can be worked out and strengthened. Our empathy, our ability to empathize, can be widened and strengthened. So how does that relate to travel, and how does travel increase empathy, and what kind of travel are we talking about? This brings us to a concept. In order to think about this, or to begin to examine this question of how does empathy relate to travel, we have to go all the way back to our earliest ancestors and the concept of in-groups and out-groups. So here we have maybe potentially what could be considered an in-group looking out for out-groups in prehistoric times, millions of years ago. This was us, and today this could be us, also with in-groups and out-groups. So most people probably can infer from what the names are, in-groups and out-groups, but in-groups and out-groups are essentially who we consider to be part of this safe inner circle. Now, in prehistoric times, this was a really useful skill. This is how we stayed alive. We were able to evaluate threats that came from the outside, and also needed to evaluate who we could trust around us in order to be safe, to go to bed at night and be safe. Today, in groups, we still have this concept. This is still something that we feel, and it may include our families, our close friends. It may also include members of our same religion, our country, our race, or even something totally random like Team A or Team B, or the Cleveland Browns, etc. Now, this, while it may have been helpful in our prehistoric times, millions of years ago, creates a lot of problems, or could create some really big problems today, and has created some really big problems today. So I wanted to ask the audience again for a little bit of participation, and to just in the chat, notice something that, or make an observation about this political cartoon or this illustration. So in the chat box, feel free to make an observation, something that you notice, or a conclusion that you can draw from observing this cartoon. Okay, so I have defining yourself by what you are not, us versus them, two opposing sides mirroring each other, but against each other. We favor what we know. Yeah, absolutely. So labeling us versus them, good versus evil. Yeah, people say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this picture demonstrates this concept of in-group favoritism, which is basically when we view people who we think are more similar to us, or are perceived in-group more favorably than we consider outsiders. We tend to generalize positive traits to people we view as similar to ourselves, and overgeneralize negative traits to people we view as part of an outgroup. An example of this may be that if someone in our in-group helps us, we may jump to the conclusion, or we're more easily jumping to the conclusion that people within our in-group are generally helpful. While if someone in an out-group steals from us, we may more easily jump to the conclusion that all people in that out-group may try to steal from us. This can lead us to believe that our own country, our own culture is superior to others, that we should distrust people that come from a different place or background. And this can happen consciously as well as completely subconsciously. And it's also important to note that while these two sides mirror each other here in the US and many places around the world, we have the added complication or added weight of structural, institutional, and cultural forces that also tell us that in many ways the same majority in-group is superior to another, which also complicates this picture. Some interesting studies about empathy and how this idea of in-groups and out-groups relate to empathy is that empathy is automatically higher for in-group members. Now, the way that some studies went about this, so there was one in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin that basically planted an actor outside of a soccer stadium, and this person pretended to be injured. And the study showed that if this person was much more likely to be helped and assisted while they were injured if those passerbys were wearing, if he or she was wearing the same in-group jersey or memorabilia as the passerbys. So people were more likely to help an injured stranger if that stranger was wearing an in-group team jersey than if he or she were wearing a rival jersey. Another study that was published in 2014 in the Journal of Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience basically had participants watch videos of a syringe needle piercing hands of different skin colors, either of their own racial in-group or of a racial out-group. And while doing this, they had the watchers, the participants, they had their brains hooked up to an MRI machine. And participants showed significantly greater activity in neurons associated with empathy when viewing pain or perceived pain in the hands of their own race. Why? So race, of course, is a social construct, yet it is valid in this study in that the majority of people in the United States, or a large number of people in the United States, still exist in very segregated communities and social circles where we are socialized to see our in-group as those who look like us. And this has great significance because even though diversity is increasing in the United States, according to UCLA's Civil Rights Project, schools are actually more segregated today than they were within the last couple of decades. So even though diversity is increasing, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're integrating. Again, this is significant also because who we view in our in-group and out-group predicts who we feel empathy for or who we more easily empathize with. As empathy goes up, prejudice goes down, and as prejudice goes up, empathy goes down. So how does travel help, or how do these integration experiences, how does travel, learning about another culture, impact this? How is this related? So the philosopher Peter Singer, he proposed an idea called the moral circle. I like to connect this to my idea of empathy as expanding our circle of empathy and who we consider to be a part of that circle. Who do we consider to be a part of our in-group? And that basically means who do we consider worthy of our consideration or that we even see as fully human? And here, as this diagram shows, at the most basic level, it may include ourself, our family, then our village, later perhaps our religious or ethnic group, our entire country, and is it possible to include all of humanity and maybe even all other species in this? A question I've always asked myself personally is why is it that I feel like if a neighbor physically near me, if their house were to catch on fire, I feel like I would react, and I would assume most people would react with extreme urgency, call 911, rush over there, see if anyone's still in the building. I'd like to think that I would immediately take action. And I know myself that in evaluating the way that I think about a natural disaster or a refugee crisis on the other side of the world, I know that I don't feel that same level of empathy or that same level of urgency in trying to get involved in that situation. And I think that something about philosopher Peter Singer's idea and this circle of empathy relates to this. Now, keeping in mind that this is not stagnant, that this can be changed, improved, and widened. And that brings us to another theory in sociology and psychology. I don't know if anyone recognizes this graphic. It's a pretty famous tool. This is a picture of the Harvard Implicit Bias test. And you can actually take this test for free. And this relates and has been used to prove the theory of contact theory. Now, a really basic way that travel and intercultural exchange improves empathy is that personal contact through positive interactions with other people actually decreases prejudice. Now, this may seem obvious today, but this idea was actually proposed during the 1950s amidst racial segregation and Jim Crow laws. So when this theory was first proposed, and it's since been proven many times, or since been shown many times and supported in many studies. But when it first was proposed, this was not a popular idea, actually. It was not considered obvious. And so what this test here, the picture of this Harvard implicit bias test does, is it basically uses computer reaction time to test associations between words and pictures that reveal an implicit bias or positive association between members of our same race. You can also test for preferences and associations around gender, around weight, around many different things. So if you go to Harvard's, or if you Google search Harvard implicit bias test, this will come up and you can take it to examine your own biases in a number of things. And so what this study and what contact theory shows, and a number of studies have shown, is that this contact, this actual interaction and genuine relationships and interactions between different outgroups or in-groups actually disassociated this effect that we have. So positive contact is associated with reduced threat responses to outgroup members and increased perceptions of similarities. So we're actually literally undoing what we see in that caveman picture with in-groups and outgroups as we increase positive experiences of contact on a really basic scientific level. Now, as we get a little bit more related to our topic of travel and global travel, there's actually a process of contact theory that sort of outlines how this process works. And it does not necessarily happen in all types of travel. And so my question I'm going to ask again to the chat in just a moment is, what types of travel situations do or do not support this contact theory? So as far as the steps to this and how this actually happens, or why travel is perhaps, and the travel is not the only way to do this by any means. Travel is a way or an effective way that maybe is somewhat more in our face or really obvious as far as making this happen. But the steps that this follows is, first, that when we go to a new place, we're basically forced to learn about what we had previously considered an outgroup. We're constantly learning and observing people and how they do life. We're observing customs and cultures and learning how to navigate a new place. So we're learning about the outgroup. In order to fit in, to make friends, to just do daily life, we inherently have to change things about our behavior. We change how we take public transportation. We may change how we attend a religious service. We change the language that we're speaking, perhaps different customs in order to not offend people. And if we're persistent, if we stay long enough, if we go into this with the attitude of making friends, we are able to form emotional ties and friendships. And what the result is not just what the previous slide said that we consider people more positively that were previously in our out group, we actually reconsider our in-group in-group. So we relook at our own place in our in-group, our own culture, our own identity and self with a more critical, accurate, and open-minded lens, and then actually expand that in-group circle to include our new understanding of the world, the similarities that we see between ourselves and our former out group, which has now become part of our in-group. My question for the chat is anything that we think specifically characteristics of the type of travel. As I said, obviously not any type of travel is going to necessarily have this effect, but any characteristics, and you can note in your chat comment whether you think this helps or prevents this. So types of travel that may promote this and types of travel that may not promote this. I would love to hear from the chat. So any characteristics in the type of travel that we would talk about when we're saying this. So I'm going to answer that immersive travel allows you to actually interact more with local people, connecting with local people. If there's going to be a service project, working with the community on the needs they have identified, so that involves a lot of communication, homestay family experiences, volunteering shoulder to shoulder. Cruise ships are probably an example that don't promote this type of travel. Resort destination travel probably doesn't support this theory. Absolutely. Trekking using local guides. Absolutely. So some of the pieces that have been identified as sort of the ideal characteristics, and in this same research, it also showed that we don't need to meet all of these characteristics all of the time, that positive interactions are positive and tend to have this effect more likely than not. And these are the ideal characteristics that help promote this atmosphere or help promote this situation where we actually do break down barriers and break down this idea of in-groups and out-groups. So one, as someone noted, getting to know local culture, like actually learning about local customs, culture, and adapting our behaviors to understand and be a part of that. Forming genuine relationships. Another piece with these relationships is related to equal status, and people mention that in service work or service projects. I saw some notes about that, that it is most likely that this happens when we are on equal footing. So this isn't like a hiring somebody relationship. This is a relationship that is horizontal. And it's important to acknowledge that with international travel, there are some inherent imbalances in who has the ability to travel to another place and who doesn't potentially. And as much as possible, we want to operate on an equal status where we collaborate. Collaboration and cooperation is another big thing. If we have goals, even playing game like on the same team, even the military has used this as a way to break down barriers within service members and service culture. If we're working towards similar goals and cooperating, that promotes this breaking down of barriers, common goals. Yes, and as some chat members said, traveling within our own countries or outside of our own countries in settings where we're not genuinely interacting and forming relationships or getting to know local culture, like perhaps an all-inclusive resort or a cruise ship, regardless of what we think about those experiences, are not going to be seeing this level of engagement. It's not going to be seeing this value of increasing empathy, at least as far as contact theory shows. Okay, and someone mentioned homestays. I'm going to show a couple brief videos that relate to the way in which Dragons travels. that sort of tries to, and obviously, you know, this is a learning process. This is something that we always want to critically examine and do better and better, and something that Dragons holds incredibly important in the way that we travel. I hope that my sound is going to play this for everyone. If it does not, please tell me in the chat. Ooh. I guess the sound is not playing right now. Oh, yep. Thank you all for letting me know. I'm going to try one little thing with my sharing settings. And if that doesn't work, I'm just going to move on to, oh, somebody said it wasn't there. It was there for a little while. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well, these videos are available on Dragon's website. I don't want to waste anybody's time trying to mess around too much with technology. I think I do have some photos and a couple personal stories I would love to share of some examples from our trips. I think what my intention in including these videos is it's a visual way, again, a picture speaking 1,000 words of sort of highlighting in short snippets the emphasis on relationships, homestays. In our next video that I was going to show, it highlights one of our instructors from Senegal who talks about sharing his religious practices with students and sort of that experience as well. Let's see. Escape. Oh, you know what? I wonder, is sound working right now? Anyone? Okay. All right. That's okay. I'd like to share a couple personal stories from my experiences with students and our Dragons trips that relate to this. So, and kind of just even the ethical questions that came up and different considerations through these examples. So this is Basilio. This was him, a picture of him when he was in a documentary about child minors as a child. He's an adult now. And he lives in Potosi, Bolivia. And our student group Potosi was one of the places that we visited. And a while ago, a couple of years ago, Basilio encountered some Dragons students and some Dragons instructors and formed a friendship. And he has since been visited by a number of Dragons groups. And when we visited him, he was adamant that he wanted us to watch the documentary that sort of told about his life story working in the mines, and then wanted to show us the mine where he worked. So he took us onto the mountain. We met his mother. We learned from stories of people he worked with, learned about his experience, and also his dreams for the future, the way that he saw tourism, sustainable tourism, potentially being a pathway out of the mines, being a pathway to have a different source of income in Potosi for himself and other miners. Now, this was a really hard experience for students. That is Basilio as an adult in the corner. This is in the mine. And this actually isn't Basilio. This is actually an interactive theatrical group that we visited after that also helps to process the mining in Potosi, Bolivia. And this was a really hard experience for students and for all of us. We did form a friendship with Basilio. We spent a few days with him, and it also brought up a lot of questions. It brought up questions around our own roles as tourists and the impact of our tourism, and his perspectives on, how he wanted us to be involved. It also brought up questions around our government, past history, as far as economic policy, military policy, and ways that created the present situation, historical factors, as well as our own buying, like purchasing of products and the materials that come from mines, like the mine in Potosi, and how those are used in the products we buy. So it caused a lot of critical self-examination of our own sort of role in this global system, as well as in our interactions on a personal level with Basilio. And our students, we didn't have answers to those questions, but we left that interaction knowing a really specific story, a really specific face, and having a friendship related to these larger global questions that we're still interrogating. I also want to bring it to an example of travel within the United States, because I think it's really important to note that in the pandemic and before the pandemic, that there is so much learning, cross-cultural learning to be had within our own country, within our own states, as far as learning the perspectives of people who aren't necessarily in our bubbles, who don't necessarily look like us. And so it was honestly just as eye-opening to do a trip in the southwest of the United States. And in this photo, this is our group and some instructors, and then this is Angel from an organization called Nuestra Tierra. And Angel is the executive director of this organization, and his organization that he started basically works to protect public lands and increase outdoor access for communities near the border of the US and Mexico. And he works in Texas and he works in New Mexico. And Angel, we were so lucky to find him. He was so gracious to basically go on a multi-day camping trip with us in the public lands that he is working to protect, and to talk to us about those policies, but as well as his personal story as a first-generation immigrant to the US, as someone who tries to recreate in the borderlands and is often profiled by Border Patrol. And we were able to become a part of his story and he a part of ours. And we've maintained those relationships with Angel. Angel partnered with one of our students and Dragons actually in a political advocacy event for his organization, and political advocacy around public lands. That student is really motivated to continue working on those issues and studying that in college, and she's about to start as a poli-sci major, and still maintains that relationship with Angel. And so this type of travel, even within in the United States, was incredibly eye-opening and perspective shifting for myself and for students as well. And so I wanted to share that US example to point out, especially also because travel is not something that everyone has access to as well. So how do we have these experiences in our own backyard, in our own countries, and when we go abroad? So I'm almost going to, this is another one of us with Angel. I'm almost going to be finishing up for questions. I'm going to go ahead and show some final, I'm going to just like slowly go through some slides from our Southwest program, as well as some various Latin American programs. And so I'll just slowly go through some photos. And as I go through, I'm just going to before I take questions, two things I would like to do is share a fun little opportunity tidbit, as well as my contact information, Dragon's contact information, and some concluding thoughts. And then I would love to hear people's comments and questions, and I can take those in the chat. So some of these are from Bolivia and Peru. Okay, so here is Dragon's contact information for anyone who doesn't have it. Of course, a quick Google search will also point you in the right direction, but you can always contact info@wheretherebedragons.com. Here is the phone and the web address. And then here's my email as well. If you have interest or comments or questions that maybe you don't feel we have time to discuss here, or if I am unable to address a longer question, you can feel free to email me personally, and I can either direct you to the right person at Dragons, or I can try my best to continue that conversation as well. And I guess before I go on to the fun tidbit, my concluding thought with this presentation is that one thing I've noticed and I learned, and I think that students have learned through these experiences, is that we are already intimately connected to the rest of humanity around the globe. We may see people as an outgroup, but our actions affect people all over the world every day. So obviously, our actions impact climate change, which impacts people all over the world. Our business and economic policies, who we choose to elect into office, and the purchasing choices we make have a direct impact on people's daily lives. And I think something that is important about cross-cultural exchange and travel is that this highlights those intimate connections that exist, and it basically replaces a statistic with a story, with a face, with a friendship, in best of cases, that ultimately, hopefully, really does expand this circle of empathy, as I like to call it, to include ideally the rest of the world in that circle. And as we face these global challenges, we truly do need people who are able to exercise that cognitive and empathetic muscle to include the rest of the world, or as widely as possible in that circle of empathy. So thank you all so much. I am humbled by your participation and willingness to be here for my presentation. Please feel free to post questions and comments in the chat, and I will take some time to comment right now. Or if you don't have any questions or comments and need to go, feel free to sign off. If there are a few people that are hanging around later into the chat, I'm happy to take questions on Zoom once the group gets a little bit smaller. But thank you all so much. And I have a comment from Anne saying that global exchange has facilitated these types of programs on the border. I agree, our students need to experience that reality. And we had a question about our adult trips running, and adult trips are running. There's open enrollment right now for adult trips and custom trips. Alex posted the link. Thank you all so much. And I will stick around if questions come up. So feel free to either stay by.
Well, on behalf of everyone, Colleen, thank you so much. Lots of great feedback. So this was super informative and really thought-provoking. So great presentation. And yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself. I think you have that ability. So you can unmute, or you can post things in the chat as well, and we can field them from there.
Yeah, and it can be about dragons, it can be about the presentation, it can be anything travel related, about the regions. Yeah, open to anything.
You have a question in the chat, Colleen.
Okay.
Have you or anyone come across traveling and open-mindedness, or a person's need for closure?
Andrew, I'm wondering if you can clarify like open-mindedness and closure. I kind of define open-mindedness in some ways along the same lines of this idea of, I guess in this way, it's kind of like increasing empathy and decreasing prejudice, which I think definitely coincides with this idea of open-mindedness. I think that would be another way of sort of saying or communicating, breaking down those. Oh, hi, is that Andrew?
Sorry, my dogs are messing around in the background, which is why I stayed muted. But yeah, no, I think that's along those same lines that I was wondering. And for me, I just recently finished the master's degree, so my mind is still in academia mode. And I know that some literature uses different, buzzwords per se. And, so trying to collect and I guess curate where those articles are coming from is what I was kind of aiming towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was doing my searches, I was specifically looking at sort of the idea around intergroup contact and empathy. But I think that you're right. I think that it probably is a similar body of research. I think open-mindedness is probably another term that would fit into that. I am happy to share resources with you. If you are interested, feel free to send me an email or put your email on the chat if you want to compare notes and stuff, for sure. But yes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Of course.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Again, any other questions for folks that are still around? Feel free to unmute yourselves or drop anything in the chat. All righty, and if there's no more questions, then we hope that you have a wonderful night. And again, I'll send this recording out to folks, so you'll have it to reference and share with anyone who you think might be interested. But other than that, we really appreciate you showing up tonight. Thank you so much. And we do have a question from Roxana. She says, I'm always interested in this. What steps can we take to avoid stepping into white savior mode when we travel? How to avoid taking from the locals and not being able to give back much? And she said, thank you for the presentation. I know this is a big question. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important question. And I think along with those like questions that I mentioned a little bit around kind of our experience in the mine with Basilio, I don't think there's a clear answer. I think that there's things that we can do to avoid that. One of them sort of being this idea around forming genuine relationships, genuine friendships. Obviously, that isn't always equal. There are inherent imbalances in regard to race and national origin. Like when we travel, like it's true that, we may have a host family stay in Bolivia and a member of our host family may not, because of economic reasons, but also visa reasons, not be able to do that same sort of reciprocal travel experience to our homes. And so I think kind of ideally one of the messages that I kind of think for myself in this presentation, sort of hopefully gears towards this like idea of relationship forming in as equal a footing as possible, with a critical lens around sort of how we're going about that, rather than maybe going in with a goal, for example, to do service work or to, do something for the people that we're visiting, beyond sort of being able to be open, listen, be empathetic, taking that cue from the local community. There may be local communities, I know, like especially related to COVID and stuff, there may be local communities, even in the United States, like certain states that have asked, people not to come. And then there's other communities, I think, that have, specifically asked for people to come and benefit from tourism, and it's hard to know that we can make that decision for other people or other communities, but sort of taking that cue from the people that we're visiting. Yeah, and there's a lot to get into about Dragon's service learning versus learning service. And I don't think I will probably touch on all of that right now, but Alex, I don't know if you want to briefly touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we definitely approach a learning service model rather than service learning. So we want to make sure we're learning about issues and projects and development in places before we act. So it's really about understanding, get that the background and the context before acting. That's really our approach in a nutshell. There's much more on our website. There's a whole book called Learning Service. It's behind me over here. I've got it right behind us. So there's lots to say about the topic, but yeah, like to Colleen's point, it's really about listening and learning first.
I think one more point to add to that, because it is such a big question, is something I noticed as well is like, also reflecting on ourselves. Like when we are traveling, if we're reflecting on like, oh, this is our sort of perceptions and judgments around these people need us or don't, but actually sort of taking that step and being like, what are my biases here and in my own life back home? And how do my actions in my own life back home, how does my political participation, how do my buying choices, how do my own biases sort of impact the way that I talk about and interact with the rest of the world, I think is also really important in thinking about that, because we are having that impact beyond just when we go there and maybe try to do a service project. Like we're having that impact in our own communities. And sort of, I think, while there are potential, pros and cons and pitfalls, I think that, travel is one of those ways that we are sort of motivated to ask those critical questions, like the one that you're asking right now.
Absolutely. Patrick, if you're referring to just our website, yeah, I'll share it right now. Yep. So for anyone who's wanting to know more about dragons, you can go to wheretherebedragons.com. You'll find a lot of information there.
I also did not add the fun tidbit at the end because I completely forgot, but your question, Patrick, is perfect segue and reminded me that, that's something related to an activity. This QR code is a way to sign up to get more information from Dragons as far as like newsletters and updates around, what we're working on. And if you so choose to use the QR code to add your email to our newsletter, there is a current travel gift giveaway going on, and these are the pictures of the prizes here. So that's one way if you'd like to sign up for information. I'll put it on the QR code here. Ooh, wrong way.
Oh, Colleen, oh, there you go. I was going to say if you could go back to it.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Henry. I would love to, Henry mentioned that he also did his dissertation on empathy and was also a Dragons instructor in Latin America. I would love to connect at some point.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, I thought there wasn't audio, but there is audio. I got a little bit late. A friend of mine, he's also on, Brian. He said, hey, there's a nice, interesting chat. I'm actually located in South America, in Colombia right now, and I never heard of you, but it sounds interesting. I'm curious, So, and you must have lots of stories, and but I'm not sure if this is adequate question, because I'm running a storytelling club, a free storytelling club, and if you like, you can also participate there and tell stories of your work, and maybe also get more people involved. I don't know if this is okay. I don't know.
That's awesome. Thank you. I lived in Colombia for a couple of years. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that, and I have so many fond memories of Colombia, and that's awesome that you're there and what you're doing. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's one of the things that completely overlaps with dragons is this idea of the power of story, and the power of a story to be able to generate empathy. So maybe Patrick, if you want to leave your email or contact information in the chat, I would love to connect with you for sure.
I mean, that's great, so because I also believe in connection, empathy, and the world has to come together and somehow. I think I was just thinking, why do we have this? I mean, right now, for example, you are in the States, lots of people around the world can connect. And I think maybe there's a message. We have to get together and we have to change the world, right? So I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I can. I don't know if you have WhatsApp. For me, I do everything over WhatsApp, but don't know. Is that okay?
Totally.
If I can leave my WhatsApp in the chat?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah? Okay, great.
Or if you want to send it to my email, actually, might even make more sense if you'd like to. Either way.
Yeah, no, I do both. I'm very open. I was born in Germany. You might hear my German accent, but I started traveling around the world, and I just think we should come together. We should gather and tell stories and learn from each other. Everyone is different, and all the projects we are doing, and the idea is to save the world, right? I guess. Anyway, so 1 second. Here's my my WhatsApp. It's a Colombian number. Yeah, wait. Okay, my name is Patrick. So
thank you.
I mean, I would love to. I mean, if you contact me, would be great, because I like to have international people always. And the next storytelling actually is coming up this Sunday. And we always have open mic. It's like a little bit of it. There is a plan, of course. We have a schedule. So we have people from France, of course, Colombia, Ecuador, and the other country is India, actually. So of course, friends of mine when I was traveling, and everyone has to say something, and everyone has a message. The idea is to learn from each other, and if there is no money interest or something, so. If you like to join, if you have to say something, do it there, just in case.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That sounds awesome. Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so sorry. I don't know if this was okay, so, but.
No, thank you for sharing. I will message you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the one that invited Patrick. Patrick, you can blame me. Sorry, I'm eating dinner. This is Brian. Patrick is cool. We actually met years ago. Our mutual friend Mark was also on this Zoom as well, attending, and he started something called the Travelers Circle way back when in DC in like the mid 90s, and that's how we met. And it was a great way to meet people and to have people from the youth hostel across the street meet locals and just talk, have fun. Break down those barriers. So it was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
That was in person. That was in the 90s, person. We met, we had food, we gathered together, and now everything is digital, which
True.
I mean, it has advantages because you don't have to travel or something. I mean, to go someplace, and it's faster, but also the disadvantage is kind of unpersonal. But I think, I can see you there, right? So it's not bad. So we have to take advantage.
Speaking of that, I forgot if you guys addressed, I've been, making dinner for part of this and eating and trying to go back and forth. Did you guys address the, of course, the elephant in the room, how COVID is affecting things?
Alex, do you want to speak to that?
I mean, sure.
It is the elephant.
I mean, COVID has certainly affected where we run programs and when we run them. We've really just taken a we have our own approach to health and safety. And basically it comes down to, can we run safe, meaningful, and responsible travel programs and around the world. And so that's the criteria we use when returning to a country that, we have really close relationships with and have been visiting for years. And so, yeah, it looks like a lot of monitoring, like our borders open? Is there a quarantine in place? What are the numbers like for COVID in the areas that we're going to? We are requiring that all students are vaccinated and instructors. We have tests on our program, and we're following local protocols. And yeah, so we're doing the best that we can. And again, anytime that we do have a program running, we've gone through the assessment of being safe, responsible, meaningful, and crossing off our pretty rigorous health and safety assessment. But great question. But to that note, we do have we have actually 5 spring programs that are heading out here pretty soon, just a couple weeks from now, heading to Nepal, Senegal, in South America. So we feel really fortunate about that.
A really cool realization. I mean, a cool realization that I had while leading programs during COVID. I led just a program to the Southwest US most recently, and sort of this shift in focus also to leading programs within our own country, for me, was an amazing learning experience around sort of discovering, just how much we can widen our perspective by building those cross-cultural connections, even within our own sort of backyards, potentially. And something I maybe would not have done if not for COVID. So that was kind of an interesting learning experience as well.
Great. Well, we're a couple minutes over now. Colleen and I might stick around for another couple of minutes if there's more questions, but we really just wanted to thank everyone for coming, and thank you for your time. We're really grateful to be able to put on our speaker series like this, and we will have more in the future. We have 4 more talks for 2022, and or for the spring at least, and we'd love to have you there. So keep an eye out on our website for those upcoming talks. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.